Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca Vickers, and on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar entitled Vaping Facts, Health-Related Impacts, Regulations, and Interventions. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration of the Florida Department of Children and Families, Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and will only be able to view your name. If you have questions, please send them to the presenter and me, the host, by using the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located in the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. The presenter will address questions as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio, there are a few options to try on screen right now, and these options are posted in the chat panel as well. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try rejoining the webinar using the I will call in telephone option. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen to receive a certificate of attendance. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available through FADAA's website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, please go to www.fadaa.org, then to our Resource Center, and then to our training library. FADAA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credits for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. At the end of today's webinar, the web browser will direct everyone to an evaluation form on FADAA's website. You will first need to register or sign into your account to complete the evaluation. Information you provide FADAA as a part of registering remains confidential. Statements of credit will be posted 30 business days after the evaluation closes. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credits or access your statement of credit. Do note that the evaluation will close midnight, April 1st, and up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license numbers for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside of the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your certification number when you register with our site. Please note that WebEx monitors arrivals and departures of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a certificate of attendance if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. James Wire is Qualified Supervisor for Clinical Social Work at Associate Teaching Professor at Florida State University's College of Social Work, where she won the 2009 Professor of the Year Award from the Student Association of Social Workers. She has been a supervisor of social services and inpatient units at Appalachian Center in Tallahassee. There, she administratively and clinically supervised staff serving clients on the Crisis Stabilization Unit at Eastside Psychiatry Hospital and the Detoxification Unit. She has been a field instructor supervising interns from Florida State University and Florida A&M University. She formerly was a clinical coordinator and an individual and group counselor at the Addiction Recovery Center in Tallahassee. Recognized as a 2008 Social Worker of the Year for the Big Bend chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. She received her master's in social work degree from Florida State University. And now I'd like to welcome Jane.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jane Dwyer-Lee, and I'm so happy to be here this morning. I'd like to thank Rebecca for the introduction, and I'd also like to thank the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association for inviting me to be here with you this morning. And of course, the Florida Department of Children and Families for providing these trainings to such a large audience. I also would like to thank, sitting next to me, my student research assistant, Valentina Alaimo, who worked very hard on this presentation. And I have to say, both of us learned so much from engaging in the research, and we found learning about this topic to be really fascinating and interesting, and there were so many surprises in the process. So we hope that you enjoy what we've selected to share with you, and I'll tell you about some of our experiences doing the research, which also includes a, a class trip, if you will. We went down and spent the afternoon at a smoke shop. And so I'll share with you when we get to that part of the presentation, the many things that we learned from that experience. So Rebecca, I am trying to change the screen.
See if clicking on the presentation and then begin clicking through your slides will work.
I'm clicking on the first slide right now and it's not connecting. And I see you are the host, so perhaps
Yes.
I need to be made the host.
Yes, I'm going to try and get back to you and see if we can get you going. Okay, now go ahead and try and see if you can click through.
There we go. Thank you so much.
Yay.
Thank you. Okay. So first off, I'd like to give a general introduction. One of the reasons why I'm sure this topic was selected was because the use of e-cigarettes has become a public health crisis, and it affects families, schools, and communities. So what we've decided to do in this presentation, first off, is to review evidence-based information and core components about e-cigarette or EC vaping devices and their many characteristics. Next, we've decided that we'd like to also illustrate the health risks and benefits, if any, of EC use. And lastly, we're going to examine some of the policies and see just how regulations on electronic cigarettes are being addressed. We also decided to put forth the objectives for you so that you'll have a clear understanding of what we set out to do. Participants, hopefully, will learn the following: the core features and characteristics of electronic cigarettes, and the neurobiology of nicotine addiction on the developing adolescent brain in particular. Also, we'll discuss the health-related impacts with prolonged exposures to EC. And finally, we'll examine the regulatory landscapes and policy of EC in different states and in different areas of future direction for integrated mental health and addiction treatment for EC users. We thought it would be important to first off give a definition of electronic cigarettes and/or vaping devices. So, according to the American Health Association, electronic cigarettes or e-cigarettes are battery-powered devices that can deliver nicotine and flavorings to the user in the form of an aerosol. E-cigarettes come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. Mini, these are called cig-alike, mid-size, vape pens, vape pod systems like Juul, e-hookahs, e-cigars, advanced personal vaporizer or mods, and even ones shaped to look like pens and USB drives. And here is the formal definition of vaping. Vaping is the act of inhaling and exhaling the aerosol, often referred to as vapor, which is produced by an e-cigarette or a similar device. The term is used because e-cigarettes do not produce tobacco smoke, but rather an aerosol, often mistaken for water vapor, that actually consists of fine particles. We've listed here the 4 core features of most vaping devices. And this is put forth by NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. First, there's a cartridge or a reservoir or a pod, which holds a liquid solution, and this solution is otherwise known as an e-liquid or an e-juice, containing various amounts of nicotine, flavorings, and other chemicals. And we'll expand upon this, like what just are some of the other chemicals in future slides. And flavorings is an entire topic area that we're going to cover. And the important thing to note here is that these make up those other particles, and anything that's inhaled that includes particles into the lungs is going to be dangerous. The second core feature is a heating element or an atomizer. Third is the power source, and this usually is in the form of a battery. And last, of course, is the mouthpiece that the person puts their mouth on so that they can inhale the substance. Here's a little visual of the evolution of e-cigarettes or vaping products. Many of us recall the first generation, and this was, the vaping devices were in the form of disposable e-cigarettes, and it actually looked just like a cigarette. The second generation, we moved up to e-cigarettes that had pre-filled or refillable cartridges. Again, they were long and slender and appeared to be cigarette looking like. But again, these we saw very few of. Again, we've evolved into the 4th generation now, but let's go back quickly and look at the 3rd generation too, which introduced us to these tanks or mods. And these also are refillable. And most of what we saw in the smoke shops today were these pod mods. And they, of course, they call them mods. And these are pre-filled and refillable. A striking quote that we thought would be great to highlight at this point is quite shocking. An average vape pod has as much nicotine as 20 cigarettes. To me, that was shocking. All right, now let's talk about nicotine. Nicotine is present in most vaping device aerosols, and this is according to the CDC. Nicotine, as we know, is a highly addictive chemical compound that's present in a tobacco plant, and all tobacco products contain nicotine. This was taken from literature from the FDA. And the Truth Initiative lets us know that nicotine levels in e-cigarettes are highly variable, with some reaching or exceeding levels found in combustible cigarettes. So this was something interesting that Valentina and I found, was that there are so many different percentages of nicotine in these vaping liquids, these In other words, they vary greatly to being a small level, medium level, or a high level of nicotine. And just like any substance of misuse, nicotine has very important impacts that we need to examine as mental health professionals on the developing brain. Some e-cigarette labels do not disclose that they contain nicotine. And some e-cigarettes marketed as containing 0% nicotine have been found to contain nicotine. To me, this is appalling. And a theme throughout our research was the fraudulent information that is provided to users. Adolescent nicotine use can harm the parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. And also, according to the CDC, each time a new memory is created or a new skill is learned, stronger connections or synapses are built between brain cells. Young people's brains build synapses faster than adult brains. Nicotine changes the way these synapses are formed. Once again, this is something that every healthcare professional should be aware of. And truly, it's not any different from any of the other substances of misuse. Here's another shocker that we decided to create its own individual slide on. 10 seconds. This is the amount of time it takes nicotine to reach the brain upon inhalation. 10 seconds. Here's a visual that the National Center for Biotechnology Information provided that we thought really aptly shows in a very efficient way what happens when nicotine hits the brain. So the cycle begins, of course, with the inhalation of the substance, and then the nicotine crosses the blood-brain barrier. Next, the nicotine will bind to the brain's nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, and then it hits the dopamine system, otherwise known as the reward pathway, and it's stimulated because, of course, nicotine is a central nervous system stimulant. And then there's the increased firing of the dopamine neurons, which reinforces the effects of the nicotine. And this is all in line with learning theory. You know, you get positive rewards, you're going to want to do it again. And this is true not only of nicotine, but any of the central nervous system stimulants. Again, this is worthy of looking a bit deeper into the adolescent brain, which is a theme that we've decided was one to highlight throughout this presentation. The hallmark of adolescence is a profound reorganization of brain regions necessary for mature cognitive and executive function, working memory, reward processing, emotional regulation, and motivated behavior. At the adolescent stage, the brain has not completed its maturation. The rational part, or the executive functioning of the brain, otherwise known as the prefrontal cortex, of a teen's brain is not fully developed, now the research is showing, until the age of 25 or so. So, the introduction of nicotine to the adolescent brain does have profound effects and interrupts the natural functioning of the brain. And of course, as stated here, it can have lasting impacts. Thought it would be a good idea now to talk about the differences between the adolescent brain and the adult brain. As those of us in healthcare know, the adolescent brain is way more vulnerable to the effects of nicotine than the adult brain. And that's not to say that the adult brain goes unaffected by the use of nicotine. But because the adolescent brain is developing, it does have a profound impact. Adolescents progress faster to nicotine dependence or a nicotine use disorder than adults do. The adolescents find nicotine more rewarding. They also underestimate the risks of smoking and peer pressure. They are way more influenced by smoking behavior in their social milieu. Current data indicate that nicotine disrupts normative limbic development and primes behavioral susceptibility to drugs of misuse. That is to say that nicotine or tobacco is the gateway drug. Let's talk about vaping and mental health. We've alluded to it many times thus far, but once again, I'd like to highlight that nicotine affects both the physical and mental health of smokers. The impact on mental health quite often has been overshadowed by the concerns about physical health. You know, we always hear about the detrimental physical effects, or the detrimental effects that it has on our physical health. But I don't know about you. I rarely had heard before doing so much of this research of the impacts on the mental health of users. Dependence on nicotine has been associated with impulsivity, mood disorders, anxiety, suicidality, and depression. Vaping is used as a coping strategy by individuals who suffer from depression, anxiety, or other mental health conditions. And vaping could potentially worsen the existing mental health conditions. For those of us who have worked in the field and worked in crisis stabilization units or detoxification centers, we see, or we did see before they banned it, quite often our clients really wanted to smoke, you know, and this is back in the days of smoking cigarettes. They looked forward to their breaks, that they could go outside and smoke. And I believe it was in 2008 where they banned cigarette smoking. But beforehand, and this is what I had a firsthand view of, it was amazing. And I often thought, wow, you know, they are relying on their smoking as sort of brought them some kind of relief. It was something to look forward to. And I believe that they all fed into the lie that it would help their depression, their anxiety, and relieve some of the symptoms of schizophrenia or any of the schizoid disorders. So anyway, one of the keys is to provide them with alternative coping strategies, and we'll talk about this when we're discussing interventions towards the end of this presentation. But yes, so often we overlook again, the mental health effects that vaping has on our clients. And I don't think many of us realize that it could, in this last line, potentially worsen their mental health conditions. As a matter of fact, nicotine increases sensitivity to stress, and it alters the coping mechanism in the brain. And this leads to an increased dose-response relationship. And this means that there's an increase in symptoms with increased exposure to nicotine. Depression and vaping in particular, have been shown to have a bidirectional association. Youth electronic cigarette use is associated with greater mental health problems, particularly among adolescents, and prevalence of EC use has risen dramatically among adolescents and young adults over the past decade. And the NCBI highlights that adolescents here, and I thought this was a little unusual, it extends into the young adult age. So they claim that these are the ages from 12 to 26. But isn't it interesting that they highlight just over the past decade? And electronic cigarettes entered the scene, I think, in about 2003. So it has just skyrocketed over the past decade. I really like this visual put forth by the FDA, and I love that this is recent information. As you can see, we cited 2021. And this is the annual National Youth Tobacco Survey. So currently, more than 2 million US youth use e-cigarettes. Let that sink in for a moment. 2 million. Of this 2 million, nearly 85% use these flavored e-cigarettes. Of this more than 2 million, 53.7% use the disposables. These are the most commonly used e-cigarette device types. And of this more than 2 million, 1 in 4 use these e-cigarettes daily. To me, this is epidemic proportions, and we need to react to this as healthcare and mental health professionals. We were so encouraged to read this quote by Jerome Adams, who is our former Surgeon General. I am officially declaring e-cigarette use among youth an epidemic, and I do not use that word lightly. And the statistics on the previous slide certainly show why this warrants epidemic status. I've alluded to the toxicity of vaping products earlier, but in these next few slides, I'd like to really disclose just how toxic these substances are that are being inhaled in such wide proportions throughout not only our country, but the world. So the fact that we're voluntarily inhaling poison is really concerning. So first off, it has everything to do with the heating process in combination with additional chemicals. So again, the heat, when you heat up the nicotine, and there are chemical additives. This leads to toxic chemical inhalation. E-cigarettes produce a number of dangerous chemicals, and these include acetaldehyde, acrolein, and formaldehyde. These aldehydes can cause lung disease as well as cardiovascular or heart disease. In case you don't know what acrolein is, yeah, e-cigarettes contain it, and this is an herbicide primarily used to kill weeds. It can cause acute lung injury and COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it may also cause asthma and lung cancer. And this information was garnered from the American Lung Association. Here are some of the other scary ingredients that are contained in e-cigarettes. Propylene glycol. This is a common additive in food, also used to make things like antifreeze, paint solvant, and artificial smoke in fog machines. E-cigarettes contain carcinogens. Many of us know that these are the chemicals that are known to cause cancer. Diacetyl. This is a chemical that's linked to a lung disease called bronchiolitis obliterans, otherwise known as popcorn lung. Diethylene glycol is a toxic chemical used in antifreeze that is linked to lung disease. And finally, e-cigarettes contain heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead. Cadmium. This is a toxic metal found in traditional cigarettes that is the main cause of several breathing problems and diseases. Benzene. This is a volatile organic compound, we'll call these VOCs, found in car exhaust. And this is the one that concerns me so much. I mean, the others do too. But any time that we're inhaling ultrafine particles, we must know that it's going to cause damage to the lungs. I mean, fine particles that are being inhaled, entering the lung, they're not meant to be entering lungs if fine particles exist in them. And volatile organic compounds. I mentioned those earlier. At certain levels, these volatile organic compounds can cause eye, nose, and throat irritation, cause headaches, nausea, and can damage the liver, kidney, and nervous system. What substances can be vaped? This information was taken from, it's relatively new, from the NCBI in 2021. And these are the most commonly vaped substances. Of course, first off, nicotine. But one can also vape marijuana, cocaine, heroin, and the range of synthetic drugs called new psychoactive substances, NPS. And the vape juice can contain a variety of things that could be toxic. So these vape juices contain things like flavors, dyes, of course, nicotine, THC, but also essential oils and multivitamins and certain traces of medicines. Here's another interesting fact that we thought we would highlight. Smoking's health effects took decades to uncover, and vaping's effects could too. Let's think about the history of tobacco. You know, it entered the scene in the late 1800s. The use reached its apex during World War II. And the real first warning didn't come out until the Surgeon General's report in 1964, where they finally proclaimed that smoking is dangerous. Now, already I mentioned that, you know, vaping really didn't enter the scene until the early parts of the 2000s, like 2003 or so. And we're still uncovering information on it. Valentina's research, a lot of it was from this year and last year. And quite frankly, many of the themes are saying the detrimental effects are still unknown. So the information is still rolling out, and it could be for years to come. Short-term versus long-term effects. Short-term. This is usually of a problem that is caused by treatment of a disease, but it usually goes away after treatment. In this case, after e-cig usage ends. And also, according to the NIH, long-term is usually a problem that is caused by a disease or treatment of a disease and may continue for months or years to come. So let's look specifically at short-term versus long-term effects with e-cigarettes. Short-term. This is a problem that is caused by e-cig usage, but it usually goes away after e-cig usage ends. One might envision this as somebody who used recreationally for a while, or maybe even used heavily for a while, but then they stopped using them. And long-term is a problem that's caused by e-cigarette usage and may continue for months or years after e-cig usage cessation. This is when the damage has been done and the damage is irreversible. And as most of us can imagine, we are generally talking about organ problems, lung problems, heart problems, kidney problems that are irreversible as a result of long-term use of e-cigs. So specifically now, let's talk about the short-term effects of vaping. The most common side effects of vaping include coughing, dry mouth and throat, shortness of breath, mouth and throat irritation, and headaches. These side effects are associated with inhaling the vapor and are also associated with smoking. This information was provided in 2019 by the Health Promotion Agency. All right, so now let's take a look at our first video segment, which highlights real-life effects of vaping. And I hope that this segment helps listeners to understand the hazards that accompany the myth of the perception that vaping is a safe alternative to smoking. The panel of experts are medical professionals. The panel of experts are medical professionals at the University of Utah and interviewed our patients who have suffered severe health consequences. And I don't know about you, but I always appreciate people's real life stories. So here are just a few of them as they explain their illnesses related to vaping. So here at Florida State University, I'm going to push that every incoming freshman views this PowerPoint. I'm hoping that wherever you work, that you'll introduce this PowerPoint to your friends, because this problem, that's just what I've found from students, is they don't even realize the dangers of vaping. They don't even know what they're smoking. They just think it's cool. There are vape shops everywhere. The availability or the access to these products is, very easy to obtain. And again, the component of peer pressure can't be dismissed, but I think, that many of these students here are unaware of just how hazardous vaping is and just how serious some of these long-term effects, well, short-term and long-term effects can be. So now let's talk about some of the long-term effects of vaping. Studies on long-term vaping consequences are urgently required. As I said, Valentina and I kept running into this, results are unknown. through so much of the research. So long-term research is severely lacking. Vaping is still relatively new, so we don't have data on the long-term risks. As mentioned in that shocking slide earlier, it took decades before we fully understood the effects of cigarettes because cancer and lung-related illnesses such as emphysema and COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, develop over many years. It could be that the risks and long-term outcomes of e-cigarettes will be different from those of traditional cigarettes, but it's still too early to know at this point in time. And we've already examined some of the differences between cigarettes and vaping devices, so it comes as no surprise that these long-term effects, while they may look similar in some ways, I have a feeling they're going to be very different too. I think that the vaping devices are going to be or are going to show a lot of serious damage to the lungs and of course to the other organs, but we'll look at that in a few slides. Many of the long-term effects of vaping, as we just said, are still unknown, but evidence suggests that vaping may lead to increased risks of all of the following. Of course, we think about lung problems, right? Respiratory problems like asthma, but also heart attacks, reproductive issues, low birth weight for babies when mothers vape during pregnancy, irritation of eyes and airways. And by the way, this is from secondhand vape too. Poor brain development. We talked extensively about the impacts that it has, especially upon the adolescent brain. Infections. So it leads to, immunocompromised situations. Seizures. And lung disease problems like popcorn lung. Like tobacco cigarette smoking, and they refer to this as TCIG in this particular study, long-term electronic cigarette vaping, and that's referred to as ECIG, in young people is associated with elevated cellular oxidative stress, known as COS, which is important in the pathogenesis of many diseases, including atherosclerosis. As with TCIG smoking, even infrequent ECIG use may be associated with adverse biological effects with implications for future health risks. Importantly, the proportion of high school students who have used ECIGs within 1 month of the time of study has skyrocketed, approaching 30% in the US. That's another word that we found throughout our research so often, skyrocketed. I mean, it has just taken off in spite of all this negative information that is seeping into society's awareness and consciousness. Here is our second video segment of the day. And once again, as stated before, and I think this is probably true of all of us, we like hearing people's stories. So here are some more real-life effects of vaping. And this video segment highlights a commentary by a toxicologist, and she discusses her work and the work of researchers at the University of North Carolina's School of Medicine. And here she highlights the fact that many of the long-term health consequences are, surprise, still unknown. Worth carefully listening to is what she shares about some of the flavors of these products. We haven't talked much about that yet, and I'm sure many of you are intrigued by the implications of flavors. But she highlights one, namely cinnamaldehyde. And this is one of the popular chemicals in e-liquids, as Valentina and I found out when we visited the smoke shop, the vape shop, on our afternoon out. So please enjoy this video segment. I think you'll find it quite enlightening. so many interesting things in that video, but so often it really irks me that people refer to vaping as harm reduction. And as this toxicologist just said, we need to change that conversation because many of these young people have never even smoked cigarettes. I'm from the generation where, smokers would then, use the e-cigarettes, that first generation, as a step down to smoking cigarettes, and therefore it would be a harm reduction method. However, the adolescents today have never picked up a cigarette. They go right into vaping. And I was a tobacco treatment specialist many years ago, and this really is a whole different animal. It has, cessation efforts are similar, but what I'm seeing is that this the vaping is worse than smoking, and that's just my opinion. And I could be wrong. We all, one of the beautiful things about this is we absorb all the information and then we formulate our own opinions. But what, and of course the results are still unknown, but just practically speaking, what we've experienced is that, this is certainly an epidemic and has highly detrimental effects, and it needs to be treated as its own individual problem instead of continuing to be clumped into cigarette smoking is as being just very similar to this, because it's not. It's different. The interventions should be different, and the psychoeducational components that we provide our adolescents should be different as well. So we heard her allude to this fact. Anytime we breathe in anything other than medication or fresh air into our lungs, there is a potential to cause harm. Vaping is no different. And this is from the Canadian Lung Association, just published in 2021. Next, we're going to discuss EVALI, EVALI, or e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. Originally known as VAPI, vaping associated pulmonary illness, this new name, EVALI, is in response to a growing number of severe lung illness cases related to using e-cigarette and vaping products, the first being identified during 2019. And as you can see, this is hot off the press from the American Lung Association just this year in 2022. Here's a case study of EVALI. An outbreak of lung injuries and deaths associated with vaping. As of January 21st, 2020, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed 60 deaths in patients with e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury, EVALI. And health officials point to vitamin E acetate, which is an additive in some THC-containing e-cigarettes, as the primary, but not the only, cause of EVALI. A CDC report analyzed bronchoalveolar lavage, or BAL fluid, from a larger number of EVALI patients from 16 states, and compared them to BAL fluid from healthy people. And here they also identified vitamin E acetate. It was also found in product samples that were tested by the FDA and state laboratories in BAL fluid from 48 of 51 EVALI patients. So this is really good that they've narrowed it down. But vitamin E acetate was not found in any of the BAL fluids of healthy people. This is pretty compelling evidence. All right, so finally, they're identifying vitamin E acetate as one of the major culprits. And this, of course, was also from this year, coming from our American Lung Association. In addition to vitamin E acetate, there are many other substances and product sources in vaping materials that are being examined as possible causes. The CDC and lung health researchers around the country are continuing to investigate this. But I believe that this is a landmark investigation where they were able to pinpoint one of the main culprits as vitamin E acetate. E-cigarettes only entered the market about a decade ago, and we're still learning the long-term effects. With this recent breakout of EVALI, researchers are working hard to learn as much as possible about the illness, its causes, and what the most effective treatments are. I wanted to provide you with this visual, and this is the number of hospitalized EVALI cases or deaths that were reported to the CDC as of February 18th in 2020. And I think it's really shocking to see what's going on here in the state of Florida. And we fall into the category of having 100 to 149 cases of hospitalized EVALI cases or deaths in our state. And this was in 2020, so I'd only imagine that it's gone up. You might ask what the stance of the FDA is. And really, they claim that they still do not have enough data presently to conclude that vitamin E acetate is the cause of the lung injury in these cases. However, the FDA does believe that it's prudent to avoid inhaling this substance. Additionally, no youth should be using any vaping product regardless of the substance. I think it's great that they have a stance, but this is pretty light. There definitely needs to be some policy reform in this arena. Valentina took it upon herself too to look at the effects of COVID. Some of this research is just now coming out, and this is a really recent research study by Reuters. It just came out this year. Researchers compared 289 vapors with 1,445 people of similar age and gender who neither vaped nor smoked tobacco, and they were all positive for COVID. A striking difference is that vapers experienced high rates of the following. I should say higher rates of the following: chest pain or tightness, chills and body aches, headaches, problems with smell and taste, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea, lightheadedness. It reinforces what we just stated earlier, people who vape are immunocompromised. Vapers are at risk too for more symptoms of COVID-19 because of this. Reuters states, our research was not designed to test whether e-cigarette use increases the risk of acquiring COVID infection, but it clearly indicates that symptom burden in patients with COVID-19 who vape is greater than those who do not vape. The inflammation caused by the coronavirus and the inflammation induced by vaping may combine to worsen the likelihood of inflammation throughout the body, with a resulting increase in symptoms. All right, now we're going to take a brief look at federal regulations. Regulatory authority of the FDA was extended to cover e-cigarettes through the agency's, and I'm putting this in quote, deeming rule in 2016. Through the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, otherwise known as the FSPTCA, the FDA has authority to develop regulations that address the manufacturing, marketing, and sale of e-cigarettes. However, the FDA does not have authority to include e-cigarettes in smoke-free policies. That would fall to the state, as would increase the minimal legal sales age for these products. And as you can see, this is also new research that just is hot off the press from 2022. The FSPTCA does not prevent states and communities from doing the following. Now, this, of course, is the state regulations as opposed to federal, including e-cigarette. So they, once again, they don't prevent states from the following, including e-cigarettes in smoke-free policies, regulating the sale and distribution of e-cigarettes, further raising the minimum legal sales age, licensing retailers, implementing price policies, and restricting or prohibiting the sale of tobacco products. These are some of the actions that the FDA was actually able to bring about. Research to, of course, funding research to help characterize the toxicology of electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS products, product application process for manufacturers, taking a stance on preventing kids from using and becoming addicted to e-cigarettes, age restrictions, that is 18 to 21 range when considering state variations, have been imposed for purchase of e-cigarette products, and the intention to issue proposed rules, check this out, by this month, April of 2022, or not yet, we're almost in April, but it should be happening within the next 31 days or so, to remove menthol cigarettes and most flavored cigars from the marketplace. Valentina and I are both curious to see if that really happens. It's going to be huge if and when it does. And the FDA has, in their defense, put forth some national youth-focused campaigns. So it expanded the Youth Tobacco Prevention Campaign in 2018. And this campaign, from what we've been able to see, looks like it can be really effective. It's called The Real Cost. So if this interests you, check out their website. They have a lot of really cool and new information up. They keep it current, and I think it is attractive to our younger population. This reaches the more than 10 million youth aged 12 to 17 who have used e-cigarettes or are open to trying them. And the goal is to educate youth about the potential risks of using e-cigarettes. And they place e-cigarette prevention materials in high schools across the nation. There's also, in terms of national youth-focused campaigns, the Truth Initiative. Many of us are familiar with this. It's been around for a while. And they launched something specific to vaping and to the young generation. It's called Safer Does Not Equal Safe campaign, and it was launched in 2018. And this focuses on correcting youth misperceptions and providing accurate information about e-cigarettes. And it also promotes on digital and social media, including the Safer Does Not Equal Safe website. And this too is new information provided by the CDC this year. Here are some of the FDA controversial actions. And this was provided to us by Reuters. It actually allowed British American Tobacco to market its Vuse Solo e-cigarettes and their accompanying tobacco-flavored pods. The approval for this came after an analysis of data from the manufacturer that showed it could help users reduce exposure to harmful chemicals emitted by combustible cigarettes. The FDA permission extended to products, and this is in quotes, which have a nicotine strength of 4.8%, roughly equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. Here are some of the shortcomings. The FDA maintains authority over manufacturing, marketing, and sales of tobacco products since 2009, yet made uneven progress on providing real oversight over tobacco products since then. The FDA did not act on an opportunity to remove e-cigarettes and other tobacco products from the market that did not meet its public health standard through its pre-market tobacco authorization, otherwise known as PMTA, authority under the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. Also, the FDA was under a court-ordered deadline of September 9th, 2021, which of course has passed, to review millions of PMTAs submitted to companies in 2020. As a result, it issued marketing denial orders to 323 companies, but it has yet to take action on most e-cigarette products with the highest market share, and this includes Juul. More than 18 months overdue in publishing the final Tobacco 21 regulations, as was required by the statute, is the final shortcoming that I thought we'd highlight today. Let's now look at some of the statistics on e-cigarettes among youth. The adult smoking rate has, thank goodness, declined from 21.6% in 2003 to 14% in 2019. That's close to 4.5 million youth using tobacco products in 2020. More than 2 million high school and middle school students reported using e-cigarettes in 2021. More than 8 out of 10 current youth users of e-cigarettes use these flavored e-cigarettes, and that to me is frightening. A study by the CDC from 2013 to 2014 showed that most youth who use e-cigarettes first start with a flavored variety, And the flavors are the primary reason that youth report using e-cigarettes. And as we're about to see, there are some pretty interesting flavors out there that make it attractive to youth. In 2021, most youths used flavored varieties. As a matter of fact, 84.7% of them did. Among middle and high school students, the most commonly used flavors were fruit flavored variety, which made up 71.6%, candy, desserts, or other sweets, which was 34.1%, mint, 30.2%, and menthol, 28.8%. So, what is the problem? And I think now is a good time to take a quick 5-minute break, and we will be back soon. Thanks, Rebecca. If you could take note of that now 5 minutes from now we'll return.
Everyone, and welcome back to today's webinar. Jane, I will go ahead and pass the presentation back over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I hope everyone got up and stretched and enjoyed your quick break. All right, so now we're going to move into some of the pictures that Valentina and I took while we visited the vape shop. And here's one of them. And interestingly enough, you might want to check out the bottom warning. This product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Now, we saw that on some of them, but not all of them. And we found that to be fascinating. But also, look at how attractive some of these names are. Lush Ice, Ice Mango, Grapey, Blueberry. I mean, they just look so attractive. And look at how they're packaged. It was just, I mean, when you walk in there, it's just this array of bright colors and attractive packages, and you get this fun vibe. So what is the problem? The percentage of disposable e-cigarette unit sales by flavor is in this visual. And as you can see from that striking red line, all other flavors that represents is going straight up. It's an alarmingly obvious upward trend. And once again, it brings to mind the word skyrocketing. But what about this flavor ban? The CDC says on January 2nd, 2020, the FDA finalized an enforcement policy that prohibits the sale of pre-filled cartridge e-cigarettes in any flavor other than tobacco or menthol, unless authorized by the FDA. What was the result of that? Well, the result was that disposable e-cigarettes' vague new flavor names attempt to evade regulation. Again, look at the name on this, Lush Ice Disposable. The BD Sticks unveiled nearly a dozen new flavor names as direct translations from its previous flavors. This was designed to subvert future restriction on the sale of flavored disposable e-cigarettes. And the new concept flavors do not expressly refer to flavors. For example, they have the new one called Marigold. It was formerly Ice Mango. And the flavor ban. Concept flavors align with historical tactics of modifying product characteristics. We saw this with big tobacco. When the 1964 Surgeon General's report came out stating that tobacco was dangerous, then they started, saying, okay, well, we'll put better filters on them, and, we'll decrease the amount of nicotine that's in them. And, they sort of scrambled to get around the new government restrictions that were put on them. And we're seeing sort of the same tactics of big tobacco, and actually big pharma too, with what I think is going to become big vaping. There's an attempt to maintain sales and subvert flavor restrictions designed to deter youth use. And these concept flavors do pose a challenge for enforcement of flavored tobacco restrictions. This all comes, by the way, from the Truth Initiative. Disposable e-cigarettes have skyrocketed in popularity following the product's exemption from federal restrictions, increasing about 1,000%. So it went from 2.4% to 26.5% among high school e-cigarette users. And get this, more than 400%. So it went from 3% to 15.2% among middle school and e-cigarette users in 2020. BD sticks are the second highest selling disposable e-cigarettes. They comprise 25% of the total market, only behind a product called Puff Bar. So these are, pictures that, again, that Valentina took when we went on our little excursion to a vape shop and spent the afternoon there and saw this steady traffic of FSU students going in and out. And we also had a wonderful chat with the salesperson who gave us demonstrations and shared with us some really interesting facts that we've contained and we've discussed so far already in this presentation. But just look at this. I mean, it's a candy shop on the left versus a vape shop on the right. It really, when we walked in, we said that. We were like, this looks like a candy store. So now we have another video called Real Life Vaping Appeal Among Youth. Let's go ahead and view this one now. And this segment I figured to be both shocking and alarming to you, the audience, and interviewed are some teens from California discussing their real life experiences with vaping. And you'll see that many of them share how it's just a part of today's teen culture. And it begins, no surprise here, with peer pressure and social media pressures that emphasize that vaping is cool. So we'll hear the teens share how easy the devices are to hide from their parents. And sadly, we also get a glimpse into how these companies are marketing by targeting our youth to be consumers. And to me, this is exactly what we heard from the people that we spoke to in the vape shop. And if you don't believe us, ask anybody, any person that you know that's in especially middle school, high school, and university, and they will tell you about this culture that I spoke to my niece who's in middle school, and she said so many of her friends are vaping already, and they're 12, 13 years old. So yeah, it really is shocking. Okay. So the marketing, to me, this is an atrocity. And it puts me in mind of Joe Camel back in the day when, when the big tobacco was targeting the young audiences too. So marketing, of course, for vaping appeals to a young audience. It's got the bright colors, the fruit, candy, alcohol, other flavors. And in 2018, more than 5 in 10 middle school and high school students, that is, get this, more than 14 million youth said they had seen e-cigarette advertising. They've seen it in retail stores, on the internet, on TV, in movies, in magazines, and in newspapers. I think it's great that a lot of the shows that are targeted to youth now have the trigger warning stated before that there's going to be smoking or vaping shown in this. Youth-directed marketing continued. Many themes in e-cigarette marketing, including sexual content and customer satisfaction, are parallel to themes and techniques that the tobacco industry aimed at youth and young adults in their advertising and promotion of conventional cigarettes. And we can all remember those. You know, the one that comes to my mind is for Virginia Slims attracting, females. We've come a long way, baby, was the slogan. But just look at the image on the right. It certainly has a sexual connotation to it, and so many of them did. It promotes e-cigarette using as being sexy and provocative. And of course, this is attractive to young people. The U.S. e-cigarette and vape market, let's talk about this for a while. The size was estimated at US $6.1 billion in 2020. And it's expected to reach $7.4 billion in 2021. And it's continuing to grow. As a matter of fact, it's expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 27.3%. And they estimate this percentage from 2021 to 2028 to reach 40.2 billion. The rechargeable segment dominated by the U.S. e-cigarette and vape market with a share of 45.4% in 2020. And this can be attributable to the low costs of rechargeable e-cigarettes. And obviously, there's a reason why they're low cost, once again, because it's being marketed to our youth. So the marketplace appeal. The key factors that are driving the market growth include technological advances in e-cigarettes and a growing awareness for safer tobacco alternatives. We alluded to a discussion that was coming earlier on harm reduction and e-cigarette use for smoking cessation. So let's talk about the implications of this. E-cigarettes were initially seen, as previously mentioned, as a smoking cessation tool. However, evidence is mixed. Smokers who switched to e-cigarettes were nearly twice as likely to remain off tobacco a year later as smokers who used traditional nicotine replacement to quit. And it's funny because in a lot of the commentary on the videos that we're showing today, we saw some people who were really saying, hey, I attribute e-cigarettes to helping me quit smoking. You know, take it easy on them. Why is everybody being so harsh about this? But 80% of the e-cigarette group was still vaping, indicating that they had traded one addiction for another. Comparing the safety of e-cigarettes and traditional cigarettes makes sense when we're talking about long-term adult smokers. It's not a useful comparison for a child or a teenager who isn't a regular cigarette smoker or one who has never been a cigarette smoker. E-cigarettes are not an FDA-approved quit aid, and there is no conclusive scientific evidence on the effectiveness. But let's talk about harm reduction. What is harm reduction? It's a proactive approach to reduce the negative impacts of behavior associated with alcohol and other substance use. Here's some food for thought. Can e-cigarettes be considered harm reduction tools for smoking cessation in particular? If kids who have never picked up a cigarette are now vaping, and if there is no conclusive evidence for its smoking cessation effectiveness. I was alarmed that there was no real evidence on this. Let's talk about treatment now. There is an interest in quitting, and it is growing. While there aren't any FDA-approved treatments for quitting vaping, treatments for smoking may help. And what I found, as I mentioned previously, I was a tobacco treatment specialist, is that many of the interventions are exactly the same for tobacco treatment cessation. Getting professional help and building a support system obviously can help, just like with any of the other substances of misuse. And it's heartening to know that it is possible to quit vaping for good. Here is a quick video talking about substance use treatment that I thought would be great to show. I selected this once again because it's real life stories first and foremost, but these stories highlight the addictive nature of vaping. And sadly, most teens had no idea that they would become addicted. And by the way, I should mention that the DSM-5 uses a distinct code for vaping-related disorder. That is to say, it's used when documentation supports that the patient has a lung-related disorder from vaping. It's different from a tobacco use disorder. We are ready to show that one, Rebecca. So once again, this highlights the addictive nature of vaping, and therefore it should not be considered substance use light, as I think so many people consider it to be. It is substance use disorder, and it is highly addictive and needs to be treated as such. And I would be remiss if we didn't talk about cultural competency or cultural humility. But this is the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact with people from cultures or belief systems that are different from one's own. And I always tell my students that we need to hand tailor our interventions with cultural humility at the forefront. We need to respect them as individuals, also respect their self-determination. And one of the key aspects, and cultural competency is one of the key aspects of psychological thinking and practice for over 50 years now. It's one of psychology's core competencies, and our federal government views it as an important means of helping to eliminate racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in health and mental health care. It's a vital component of substance use treatment. An individual's culture affects the following: treatment settings, home-based social supports, coping mechanisms, and stigmas attached to substance use disorders. These should all be taken into individual consideration prior to intervening, which is one of the reasons why assessments are so very important. Treatment providers need to understand culture as a broad concept. Recognize that each individual is unique, and treatment providers must clearly understand how cultural background affects substance use treatment. Consider faith, family, language, and traditions. Let's go back to looking at this through a lens of mental health implications. So we already discussed how many young people cite feelings of stress, anxiety, or depression as reasons why they start and continue to vape. Yet, let's clearly recognize that nicotine can worsen anxiety symptoms and amplify feelings of depression. Using e-cigarettes at a higher frequency was associated with higher depressive symptoms, including feeling sad or having crying spells up to a year later. And trace metals found in vape liquid may play a role in the potential link between vaping and depression. There is emerging evidence of a link between quitting vaping and improvements in mental health symptoms. The Truth Initiative survey that we've talked about so many times today, it shows support for this link between quitting nicotine-containing e-cigarettes and improved mental health outcomes. 90% of those who quit said they felt less stressed, anxious, or depressed. Let's talk about integrated care now. It's one of the most promising directions for addressing inadequacies in the delivery of child and youth mental health services. Here we can build a problem detection and early intervention programs. And we can also create an expanded number of sites where a youth and child mental health care, where a child and youth mental health care can be delivered. However, the growth of pediatric integrated care continues to face barriers. Policies need to support the following: transformations in the scope of pediatric primary care and financing support mechanisms. A larger and more diverse mental health workforce is needed. And additionally, training programs must provide clinicians with the skills they need to help engage and help families. There remains so much to be learned about implementing interventions. There are strong foundations on which to address these needs, and it should be possible to coordinate efforts in these directions and move pediatric integrated care forward. New and novel frameworks will be needed to address mental health care needs. Problems that do not require traditional interventions, enabling integration of mental health care, promoting specialist mental health care delivery, and facilitating the treatment and translation of mental health research into practice. We needed to highlight the fact that active participation in families will be necessary. And as we're ending this presentation, I wanted to include this video. This is discusses a broader scope. It comes from the School of Medicine at UCLA. And this final segment, I have to say, is my personal favorite because it first gives a brief history of vaping, and then it moves into some of the similarities to smoking cigarettes. It discusses what it does to both the body and the brain. So we see many strategies that I alluded to before that were used by big tobacco, and now they're being used by, my name is Big Vaping. They're being used by the Big Vaping Playbook. So let's have a look at this final video. All right. So, evidence-based vaping prevention. These strategies can help reduce the chances of vaping-related illnesses and improve the overall health of communities. Those who want to quit smoking cigarettes should seek advice from their healthcare provider instead of self-prescribing e-cigarettes. And pharmacological, that is nicotine replacement therapy, and behavioral treatment aim to effectively reduce withdrawal symptoms. Additionally, there are several evidence-based prevention programs that educate teenagers on the potential harm of vaping. One such program, called Catch My Breath, has successfully reached out to millions of school-aged children. References and resources will be able to be accessed from the PowerPoint, which is made available to participants post-webinar. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that, there are so many smoking-related costs to our society. State and community interventions need to occur. Programs and policies need to be put in place in order to change norms surrounding vaping. There needs to be more of an effort to have cessation interventions and cessation services available. The classic intervention that I was taught and I have shared with so many of my students is the classic 5 A's: ask, advise, assist, assist, and arrange for help. And in addition to active counseling and problem solving and skills training, there needs to be relapse prevention incorporated into the programs of people who are seriously trying to stop vaping. And I believe that is the end of our presentation. And as you can see, we listed the videos here. And here are all the references. And I am going to turn to Valentina right now and high five her, woo, for all the work she did on this presentation. I hope you found it to be not only enlightening, but enjoyable too. It's a serious topic that needs to be discussed more in healthcare forums. Thank you all for your attention, and thank you, Rebecca, for doing such a great job monitoring this. And again, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much, Jane. It was just wonderful information. And, you are getting, I don't know if you can see every single comment in the chat, but people are it was just so great. And people are just, saying how wonderful you were and how great it was. And, thank you to Valentina, the silent person behind the screen that also provided much information. It was a pleasure working with y'all both. And so for everyone today, we've included Jane's contact information on the screen so that you may contact her with any further questions. And just once again, we really appreciate all the work you put into this and how great it was. And please see a couple of items of business before we conclude today's webinar. In the chat panel, there will be a link to today's evaluation. And you will additionally get another opportunity to take the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. And if you want to receive CE credits or a statement of credit for this event, you must complete the evaluation. Additionally, you'll be prompted to register or sign in to complete the evaluation. You can register as a visitor at no cost. For CEs to be reported to CE broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license and prefix number when you register. After you register or sign in, you'll be directed onward to the evaluation. You must use the same email address you used today when you registered for our webinars and when you set up your profile in FADAA system. This is the only way to connect your attendance and your profile. You will get a second opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. The sender will be messenger@webex.com. Please note that the evaluation will close Friday at midnight, and this will take up to 30 days before you receive your statement of credit. We do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be generated as a journal entry within your profile 30 business days after the evaluation closes. And we thank you for participating in today's webinar. We'd like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health for funding today's education. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.